Have you ever heard the saying that no matter how good you are at something, there's always an Asian kid who's better at it? Well, that's Orhan's entire life. He is known as a jack of all trades, meaning he can learn almost any skill. But no matter how hard he tries, there's always going to be someone better than him. So he needs to find a way to overcome his weakness. One day, Orhan was working at his desk when all of a sudden, the party leader tells him he is being kicked out of the party. Oliver tells Orhan that he has been ignoring the power imbalance in the party for a while now because he and Orhan are childhood friends and he wanted to remain by his side, but at this point, he can't deny that keeping Orhan in the party would just slow the party down. Oliver is really trying to be nice and let Orhan down gently, but the other two are being total jerks about it. Anneli and Derek both call Orhan a sack of dead weight and tell him the team would be much better off without him. And while Oliver would never have said that out loud, there's some truth to their accusations, so he asks Orhan to formally resign from the hero party. Orhan is heartbroken as he thinks back to how he and Oliver formed this party 8 years ago and quickly rose to S rank together. They were even the first to reach the 94th floor of the Great Southern Dungeon, so he can't understand why Oliver is abandoning him now. Oliver clarifies that he understands how important having an enchanter like Orhan, who is capable of using support magic, has been for the party, but last month, during a joint raid, he observed how a different S-rank party fought with their support mage, and to put it frankly, Orhan's support magic sucks compared to that girl's. And Orhan can't even deny it because he knows it's the truth. His support magic has always been mid, no matter how much he practiced, but he says the only reason his spells are so mediocre is because he was originally meant to be a swordsman, but he had to convert to support magic to balance out the party. However, before he could finish the sentence, Derek cuts him off and reminds him that the only reason Orhan had to switch to being an enchanter is because Oliver is way better at swordsmanship than he is. Orhan can both wield a sword and cast support magic, but all around he's pretty mid when it comes to his skill level, and as much as Oliver hates to do this to him, he says he has already found a replacement enchanter, so Orhan's help is no longer needed. He already knows the other two don't like him, but if Oliver is the one giving him the boot, then there truly is no reason to remain in this party. He gets up and starts walking towards the door, and as he is leaving, Anneli talks about how glad she is that he won't be here to boss them around anymore. She also tells him that he shouldn't feel too bad about himself because his skills are still good enough for him to make it as an A-rank adventurer, but an inferior fighter like him is not cut out to be part of an S-rank party anymore. Hearing that from her really stings, so he decides to go off on his own and tackle the southern dungeon to prove that he's not inferior. His sword skills may not be the best, but they are still strong enough for him to handle a group of goblins on his own, and since he can also use support spells, he is able to constantly buff himself with strength magic to make his fights a little easier. Getting the timing right is a bit tricky, but with enough practice, he will be able to cast spells effortlessly in the middle of combat, and no one will ever call him worthless again. After he's done goblin slaying for the day, he heads over to the teleportation crystal to register his card so he can come straight to the 7th floor next time. But while he's there, he sees another party running up to the crystal. He starts walking away because he would rather not get involved with a bunch of randoms, but as he is leaving, he hears the party members panicking because they were just ambushed by a group of orcs, and while desperately trying to escape, one of their party members was left behind. The leader tries to assure himself that leaving her behind was the right choice since they all would have died if they tried to fight. The others ask him if they should go back to save her, but the leader doesn't think that would be a good idea since they aren't strong enough to beat all those orcs. However, Orhan overhears this, and even though it's none of his business, he can't stand the thought of someone else being abandoned by their party, so he turns to the party leader and insults him for leaving a party member to die. One of the party members gets offended and tries to punch Orhan, yelling that he had no choice because he wasn't strong enough to save her. But Orhan flips him on his ass and calls him worthless before demanding to know where the girl was left behind. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the dungeon, the girl in question has been cornered by the orcs, and they are closing in on her fast. She tries putting up a barrier to keep herself safe, but there's still nowhere for her to run, and it's only a matter of time before the orcs smash through. Tears well up in her eyes as the orcs finally break through and her doom is almost guaranteed, but at the last second, a wind spell is cast in front of the orcs, pushing them back and buying time for Orhan to step in front of the girl to protect her. The girl is in shock because she wasn't expecting anyone to come save her, but before she gets a chance to speak to Orhan, the orcs begin their attack, so he runs out to intercept them. Sophia assumes he must be a swordsman, but to her surprise, she sees Orhan cast support magic on himself in the middle of the fight. Orhan then proceeds to slice one of the orcs in half, and to make things a little easier, he enchants his sword with sharpness 5 so he can deal with the rest of them. There are a lot more orcs here than he thought there would be, so he can see why the party was forced to run away, and he might owe them an apology later, but for someone of his skill level, this much is easy to handle. The remaining orcs all charge at him at once, so Orhan begins slicing through them one after the other, and Sophia is astonished because she has never seen anything like it before. Once he's done, Orhan turns to the girl and asks if she's okay, but she's so stunned that all she can do is fall to the ground and start bawling her eyes out. Orhan makes sure she's alright and helps her get out of the dungeon, and after that, he starts walking away, but she calls out to him and says she would like to thank him properly for saving her, so she introduces herself as Sophia Claudel. Orhan recognized the Claudel family name, and he also spots the crest on her cloak, leaving now doubts about her identity. He introduces himself to her as well, and afterwards, Sophia offers to treat Orhan to dinner tonight as thanks for saving her. Orhan initially tries to decline, but Sophia is really insistent, so he eventually caves and agrees to go out with her. A little while later, she leads him over to one of her favorite restaurants, and though it isn't the fanciest place out there, she really likes the food here, so she thinks Orhan will like it as well. Orhan notices that the signboard out front has the same crest as Sophia's cloak, and it's pretty clear that she must be a member of the Night Sky Silver Rabbits, one of the biggest guilds in the kingdom. The clan is extremely powerful, so he's starting to second-guess getting involved with Sophia since things might get complicated. All of a sudden, Sophia spots her sister sitting over at one of the tables, so she goes over to ask her what she's doing here. Selma explains that she had a meeting nearby, so she decided to come here for dinner, but that aside, she asks Sophia what she's doing here with a man, because she's way too young to have a boyfriend. However, after taking a closer look, she realizes that the man is actually Orhan, and they happen to know each other. Sophia is surprised that Orhan knows her sister, but there's no way he could ever forget her. Selma Claudel is the leader of the most powerful S-rank party in the Silver Rabbits, as well as the most powerful enchanter on the whole continent. She's the reason that support mages are so respected when it comes to party formations, and coincidentally, she's the same enchanter that Orhan's party used as a basis for kicking him out. He knew Sophia was also part of the Silver Rabbit clan, but he didn't expect her to be directly related to Selma. But he doesn't recall ever doing anything to offend Selma, so he doesn't understand why she looks so mad at him. Selma gets in his face and asks him if he thinks it's appropriate to be going on a date with her 14-year-old sister this late at night. Orhan understands why Selma would be concerned, so he assures her that she is misunderstanding the situation and that he has no romantic interest in her sister whatsoever. However, the way he said that makes Selma even more angry because she thinks he's saying Sophia isn't attractive enough for him. Sophia begs Selma to stop making a scene in front of the man who saved her life, and upon learning that Orhan saved Sophia's life, Selma is very apologetic for her rudeness and thanks him for his help. They all sit down together, and this is the first time Orhan and Selma have gotten a chance to talk like this. Orhan explains that they met during last month's raid, and since they were both enchanters, they spent a lot of time together, although Orhan was mostly just assisting Selma. Selma tells him he was a huge help, but that much is to be expected from someone in the hero's party. However, Orhan tells her he isn't actually part of the hero's party anymore. Selma is shocked to hear that because she can't imagine why the party would want to get rid of someone as useful as Orhan, but she's not one to miss a good opportunity, so she asks if he would be interested in accepting a job. Orhan tells her he actually wants to adventure alone for a while, so he can't join her clan, but she says she just needs someone to join a teaching expedition that her clan will be hosting tomorrow, and she assures him that he will be paid well for his efforts. All he needs to do is focus on teaching the new recruits. They plan to spend roughly 3 days down on floor 50, and they already have a group of A-rank adventurers leading the expedition, but she'd feel a lot better if Orhan were there to help. After all, after working alongside him on the joint raid, she can see just how capable Orhan truly is as an enchanter. Orhan is honored to hear that Selma respects his enchanter skills, but he was just kicked out of his party for being a weak enchanter compared to Selma, and he doesn't want to limit himself to support magic again, so he politely declines her offer. Selma is surprised since she didn't think Orhan would turn her down, but he says he has his reasons. Selma doesn't intend to push the issue if he really doesn't want to do it, but Sophia begins pleading with him to reconsider because she would feel a lot safer on the expedition if Orhan were there. Orhan still doesn't want to relive his days as nothing but an enchanter, but seeing Sophia plead with him like that makes him reconsider, so he tells her he will think about it before he makes his decision. Selma is pleased to hear that Orhan is at least going to consider her offer, but to be clear, he informs her that he will only accept if he's allowed to fight with his sword because he doesn't want to be limited to just enchantments anymore. Selma can't believe what she just heard because she has never seen an enchanted switch to swordsmanship, and she honestly doubts that Orhan would be any good as a swordsman, but she figures that if things get really bad, he will probably just go back to using enchantments. She tells him that if he decides to join the expedition, then he should come to the Silver Rabbit HQ early tomorrow morning, and they go their separate ways for the night. Before Orhan heads home, he makes one final stop at a weapon shop, and he seems to be pretty close with the owner, which is why he came here to chat. The old man prepares a cup of tea for him and thanks Orhan for his help because business around here has been booming ever since he started recommending this place. However, that's kind of what Orhan wanted to talk to him about. He informs the old man that he was kicked out of the hero's party, so now no one will listen to him even if he does recommend the store, and he wants to apologize for not being able to help anymore. However, the man tells him he has nothing to apologize for. Whether Orhan is part of the hero's party or not, he's still the same person, and he has already done so much to help here, for which the man is very grateful. Orhan may not be a hero anymore, but he's still a hero at heart, so the man tells him he should live for himself from now on and help as many people as he wants to. The next morning, Orhan heads to the Silver Rabbit HQ and meets the president, Vince Breyer, and Vince has heard a lot about Orhan, so he says it's a pleasure to finally meet him. Orhan says he's going to need a few more details on the expedition before he decides whether to take part in it or not, so Vince asks Selma to fill him in on everything he needs to know. She explains that the expedition will be to the 51st floor, but they will only be heading up to the 21st floor on the first day, and then they'll slowly progress all the way down to the 51st floor after that. Before Orhan showed up, Selma met with Vince ahead of time so they could talk about how dumb it was for the hero party to kick Orhan out. They won't be anywhere near as strong as they used to be now that he's gone, because his support magic was hard carrying them through most battles. It's true that the potency of Orhan's support spells is lower than average, but his cast speed is top-notch, at least 4 times faster than Selma's. And on top of that, he was using multiple original spells at once, while also constantly analyzing the battlefield to decide the best move to make. Vince finds it hard to believe that someone so capable would be labeled as useless, but Selma assumes that Orhan was just so good at his job that the hero party didn't notice all his contributions to their success. Back to the present, Selma is done explaining the details of the expedition, and basically, there are going to be 10 different rookie parties with 5 escorts, including Orhan and Selma. For the most part, rookies are supposed to handle things on their own, but if something out of the ordinary happens, the escorts will step in to make sure nobody gets hurt. Orhan gets the gist of it so far, but he asks why they are only bringing 5 escorts. Normally, with such a short expedition schedule, you'd want to minimize risk as much as possible by hiring as many escorts as possible. Selma makes up an excuse and says she wouldn't want to make it too easy for the rookies, but Orhan knows that's not the real reason. They must have some secret objective they are trying to achieve, and there's no way they would tell Orhan about it since he's an outsider, so he decides to just drop the question and go along with it anyway. Vince thanks him for being so understanding, and as part of the deal, Orhan will receive 2 gold pieces in advance and 10 more upon successful completion of the mission. Orhan asks if they are sure about this, since what they are paying him is the equivalent of a year's worth of living expenses for a few days of work, but Selma tells him he's worth every penny to them. The next day, Orhan shows up early at the entrance of the dungeon as agreed, and once he gets there, he sees a bunch of the new adventurers preparing themselves nearby. A few moments later, Selma and Sofia arrive as well, and Sofia seems really happy to see Orhan. A little too happy if you ask Selma, so she reminds Orhan that Sofia is under 18 and he had better not try anything with her. That aside, Selma asks Orhan why he's standing so far away from the rest of the group, so he explains that he didn't want to make the recruits nervous by standing too close since they've never seen him before. He makes a good point, but the recruits are going to need to get to know Orhan sooner or later, so Sofia offers to introduce Orhan to everyone. First up, she takes him to meet the other 3 escorts, and they introduce themselves as Anthem, Bernard, and Kathy. Both Bernard and Anthem are defenders, while Kathy is a healer, but Orhan thinks this whole thing is a bit odd since he may be able to use his sword. But Selma didn't know that when she asked him to join, so that means she was planning to go in without a frontline attacker. The reason for this is that Selma got really desperate. After all, the Silver Rabbits haven't made any progress in the past year, so she wanted to achieve something as soon as possible, even if it is a little risky, but she's not going to admit that. To avoid getting questioned, she changes the subject and offers to introduce Orhan to the rookies next. She addresses all of the recruits and says she knows they must be nervous about going on their first dungeon dive all the way to the 51st floor, but she assures them that nothing is going to go wrong because she has enlisted a group of very powerful adventurers to help in case something goes wrong. She then introduces Orhun as the cornerstone of the operation and tells everyone that he has made it all the way down to the 94th floor before, so they can trust him to have their backs. The rookies are all amazed by Orhun's accomplishments, especially when they find out that he used to be a member of the hero party. But Orhun isn't used to this much attention, so he doesn't know how to react. Now that everyone has gotten familiar with Orhun, Selma tells them to finish their final equipment check before they head down into the dungeon. She then turns to Orhun and says she would like him to escort Group 10 because they are the most promising rookies of the bunch, so she thinks they could learn a lot from having Orhun as an example. He is then introduced to the special Group 10 that Selma talked about, and he finds out that Sophia is a member here, but he doesn't understand why there are only 3 members on this team when all the others have 4. Logan speaks up and confidently says it's because none of the other rookies can keep up with them, so they were grouped together instead. Logan introduces himself as the party's enchanter and says he will one day surpass Selma, and Orhun thinks it's good that he has ambition, but his attitude is a bit of a problem. Next up is Caroline, and she introduces herself as the party's defender, but Orhun is a bit confused because she doesn't seem to be wearing any armor or carrying a shield for that matter. Caroline explains that she doesn't use that stuff, and instead will just jump out of the way when monsters get too close. In her defense, dodge-type defenders are actually a thing. Her tactic would work, but Orhun warns her that being a dodge-type defender requires some Sekiro-level evasion skills, so it's difficult for beginners to pull off. He asks if any of the teachers warned her of the learning curve, and Logan mentions that Caroline was warned many times, but she never listened to the advice, and the two of them start fighting afterwards. Orhun now realizes what Selma meant when she said this group was special. But on the bright side, Sophia is here too. And she's the most normal student he could hope for since she won't be causing him any problems. A little while later, they all head into the dungeon together, and even though they were all causing a ruckus outside, in here, they are behaving really well. They are all glad to have Orhun around. But Caroline wonders why someone from the hero's party is joining their expedition since the Silver Rabbit clan is one of the hero party's rivals. Orhun clarifies that he isn't a member of the hero party anymore, and Caroline is shocked to hear this, so she asks him why. But Orhun doesn't want to admit that he got kicked out, so he tells her to mind her own business. Even so, Caroline continues talking nonstop and mentions how Sophia wouldn't stop bragging about meeting Orhun the other day, and Sophia is a little embarrassed, but she does think that Orhun is amazing, and she's really happy he decided to come after all. A few minutes later, as they are walking through the cave, a group of wolves suddenly appears behind them, and normally, they would have to stop to face them, but Orhun isn't worried because he already left a bunch of traps behind as they entered, so any monsters that try to sneak up on them will instantly be dealt with. This way, they won't have to waste any time on watching their backs, but I'm starting to see why Orhun was labeled as useless because he doesn't tell a single person that he is basically guarding their rear all by himself. As they progress through the dungeon, Orhun gets a chance to observe how the rookie fights, and he's honestly impressed. He initially thought Logan was nothing but a rookie with a big ego, but he actually has decent enchanter skills. If he can maintain his output during longer battles, then he could easily join an A-rank party. However, for someone who's supposed to be the party leader, he's absolutely terrible at giving instructions, though he will probably get better with time. As for Caroline, she has the speed necessary to be a dodge-type defender, but she's a bit too aggressive because the second she sees a monster, she charges right at it. Technically, that's her job as a defender, but it still seems a little too reckless to Orhun. Next is Sophia, and she's not as impressive as the other two, but she's still decently skilled as a caster, and she doesn't have any obvious flaws in her fighting style, so Orhun thinks she has a promising future ahead of her. Thankfully, the rest of the expedition went smoothly, and by the end of day 1, they had successfully made it to the 21st floor of the dungeon. Selma later meets with Orhun and asks him what he thought of Group 10, and he tells her she was right about them having potential, but they don't really work as a team, especially Caroline. But Selma already knows how difficult they can be at times. It's time to head home, so they say goodbye for the day and agree to meet back up tomorrow morning, but the next day, Orhun wakes up to a terrible sight. The hero party has officially gone public about him being kicked out, and that means everyone in the city is aware of it now. He knew this would happen eventually, but he wishes it could have been after he was done with the expedition since all the students looked up to him because they thought he was a member of the hero party, so if they find out that he was banished, their opinion of him will surely be diminished. Either way, he's still going to have to deal with it, so he starts heading to the dungeon entrance for day 2 of the expedition. However, as he is walking down the street, he is suddenly called out to by Luna. She is also a member of the hero party, and she was always really kind to him whenever they talked, but she was away on an outing when Orhun was kicked out. He knows she would have stuck up for him if she were around, so he wonders if things would have gone differently in that case. But there's no use speculating now. Luna asks him to come back to the hero party because they need his strength, and Orhan is surprised to hear that, so he asks her if the others share her opinion, but she says she hasn't told the others yet. She just came to find him because she knows how important Orhan was to their team. She's serious about wanting to bring him back, but Orhan has already made his decision. He doesn't want to return to the hero party, and even if he did, with the news already in the public eye, it wouldn't make sense for him to return now. Luna hasn't read today's paper yet, so she doesn't know what it says about him, but she reminds him that they promised to conquer the Great Labyrinth together. Mentioning that brings up a lot of painful memories for Orhan, so he pulls his hand away and says that he, Luna, and Oliver made that promise a long time ago, yet Oliver was the one who kicked him out, so it's never going to happen now. He had always hoped that the three of them would stay friends forever, but there's no going back to how things were before. As Orhan is walking towards the dungeon entrance, he is worried about what the children will think of him after seeing the article, because it states that he was kicked out of the hero party for being too weak. By the time he arrives at the meeting point, he finds all the students murmuring amongst themselves about the article. They are wondering why Orhan didn't tell them that he was kicked out of the party, but before they could say anything to him, Selma arrives. She apologizes to Orhan because she hyped him up by saying he's a member of the hero party in front of the kids a lot yesterday without knowing he had been kicked out. Orhan tells her there's no need to apologize since it's kind of his fault for being vague about what happened. Either way, whether he was kicked out or not, it is still true that Orhan made it down to the 94th floor, and he did perfectly fine yesterday, so there's no reason for any of them to doubt his capabilities because of one silly article. Caroline and Sophia still have complete faith in Orhan's abilities, but Logan, on the other hand, doesn't seem so sure anymore. He asks Orhan if what the article says is true, and he confirms that it is more or less accurate. He was indeed kicked out of the hero party for being too weak, but weak is a relative term, so Orhan assures them that he is still more than capable of getting them down to the 51st floor safely. But while the others don't seem to have a problem with it, Logan is convinced that Orhan must be a bum. They head into the dungeon, and the plan is to make it to the 35th floor by the end of the day. As their supervisor, Orhan isn't allowed to actively help them until they reach the 31st floor, so until then, he just has to watch and be ready in case they mess up. But with how talented they are able to handle the lower floors without much trouble. Once they finally arrive at the 31st floor, Orhan takes over as the leader and stands as the vanguard, but all of a sudden, he tells everyone to stop because he can sense monsters up ahead, so they all get into battle positions and prepare to fight the goblins. He asks Caroline to go on the attack first, so she runs out immediately, but she got in a bit too over her head, so she might need a little help. Orhan is about to ask Logan to cast some buffs on her, but before he could even say anything, Logan has already begun casting because he doesn't think it's worth it to wait for Orhan's instructions. After all, if he's not a hero, then anyone could do what he does. Orhan can tell what Logan is thinking, but it doesn't bother him, so instead, he turns to Sophia and unfortunately, it looks like she is up against an orc. She's too scared to move since she still has trauma from nearly being killed in the dungeon, but Orhan doesn't intend to step in just yet. Logan thinks Orhan is a failure of a teacher for not saving Sophia when she's in trouble, so he's about to save her himself, but just then, he notices Orhan secretly casts an agility debuff on the orc to buy Sophia more time to compose herself. He then assures her that she is more than strong enough to handle a threat like this because she isn't alone like last time. She has Caroline, Logan, and him here to support her if anything goes wrong. And with the confidence boost she got from Orhan, Sophia is able to cast an advanced fire javelin to obliterate the orc. Orhan is surprised because he had no idea she was capable of using advanced magic, and Caroline thanks Sophia since amazing for pulling off a move like that. Orhan congratulates Sophia on a job well done, but Logan is still in disbelief because the way Orhan handled that was exceptional. Especially the fact that he was able to cast an agility debuff instantly while hiding it, and it makes no sense that the hero party would kick Orhan out when he has these kinds of skills, so he has no idea what to believe. The group eventually makes it to the 35th floor, but there, they are confronted by a giant tarantula. Logan freaks out a little because he knows none of them are strong enough to handle that thing by themselves. He's about to suggest that they should retreat, but all of a sudden, Orhan tells him to cast agility, magic, and durability boosts on the others so they can attack. Logan thinks it's crazy to even consider attacking that thing, but Caroline has already run out onto the front lines to face it. He tries to chase after her, but Orhan tells him to wait, because as a supporter, he would be at a disadvantage if he went out in front. Orhan then calls out to Caroline and instructs her to jump over the spider so she can attack its back, and as she does so, she's able to get some really good hits in. The spider is now focused solely on her, so Orhan asks her to keep aggroing it, but to make sure she avoids touching its venom. Her agility is the only reason she is able to outpace the spider, so Orhan tells Logan to maintain the buff spell while Sophia casts her attack spell. Once Sophia is done casting, she launches several air slashes at the spider, severing 4 of its legs and causing it to crash to the ground. However, the battle isn't over yet. Orhan tells Logan to cast another strength and agility boost on Caroline. At first he doesn't understand why, but a moment later, the spider spits out some thread and starts pulling Caroline into its mouth. This is why Orhan asked Logan to cast the strength boost in advance to allow Caroline to break free on her own, but it turns out that she's still a little too weak even with the buff. So Orhan secretly casts a sharpness boost on her dagger, and the extra bit of cutting power is enough for Caroline to finally escape. After that, Orhan tells Sophia to hit the spider with a rock bullet to finish it off, and with that, the spider has finally been dealt with. Orhan congratulates everyone on a job well done, and after that, they all return to the surface. Tomorrow will be the final day of their expedition where they make the big push to the 51st floor, so Selma tells everyone to make sure they get plenty of rest tonight. As Orhan is leaving for the day, he is suddenly called out by 2 of the other supervisors. But they aren't here to cause any trouble, they just wanted to ask Orhan to grab some dinner with them. They seem like nice people, and he never really got a chance to talk to them during the expedition, so he agrees to join them and they all head to the tavern together. Meanwhile, Sophia, Caroline, and Logan are on a carriage heading home, but Logan has a lot on his mind after everything he saw Orhan do. He recalls Sophia mentioning that Orhan saved her from a group of orcs, so he asked her if she remembers the way Orhan fights. Sophia says she wasn't really paying attention, but she recalls that when he landed, there was a huge gust of wind, and after that, he cast some sort of enchantment on his sword before slicing through the orcs. Logan assumes the spell she is talking about must have been a sharpness enchantment, and those are difficult to pull off because they work on weapons instead of humans. On top of that, he finds it weird that Orhan was using a sword to attack when he is so skilled with magic. Sophia admits that she doesn't know why he does that either, but she does recall hearing something about him converting to an attacker recently. Logan was disappointed when he heard that Orhan had been banished from the hero party, and he also felt angry at him for betraying his expectations, but he was completely wrong. Not only did Orhan function as a perfect supporter, but he also used an agility debuff on an orc, which is way harder than you would think. Debuffs are completely different from regular buffs, and even Selma rarely uses them because they are so difficult to cast, yet Orhan was able to make it look easy. He was also able to perfectly analyze the battlefield and give orders precisely when needed, and was even able to predict the tarantula's final attack ahead of time. He was much better than any enchanter Logan has seen before, so it makes no sense for him to switch to being an attacker. Caroline asks if Orhan is at least strong when he uses a sword, and Sophia confirms this because otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to take out the orcs that attacked her back then. Logan realizes that Orhan must be a genius for him to be so skilled at both magic and swordsmanship, so he knows he has no hope of outdoing him. But that doesn't mean he is going to give up. He swears to himself that he will do his best to learn whatever he can from Orhan and grow strong enough to match him in strength someday. Meanwhile, on Orhan's end, he and the others are currently having dinner together at the tavern, and they love how good the food here is. The others ask him what he used to do for fun in the hero party, but Orhan tells them he never really had much time to have fun since he was in charge of all the party's errands and busy work. That's pretty depressing, and if that's the case, then it makes that article about Orhan being useless even worse because it sounds like he was the literal backbone of the party. They tell him he should just ignore those ungrateful jerks in the hero party, and hearing others stick up for him like that means a lot, so Orhan thanks them for being so supportive. That said, they do still have a few questions they would like to ask him, because from what they know, Orhan used to be an enchanter when he was in the hero party, and according to Selma, he was a damn good one. So they were wondering why he switched to being a frontline attacker. Orhan explains that he switched to using a sword after he left the hero party because that's what he always wanted to do. He says he used to be a swordsman in the hero party, and it had always been his dream to become the best in the world, so he was unbelievably happy when he got the position. His ambition came from watching his grandpa fight with a sword all the time, so he wanted to be able to do amazing stuff like him. If that's the case, then they ask why he chose to become an enchanter in the first place, but it wasn't really something Orhan wanted to do. Back in the early days of the hero party, once they started venturing into the lower floors, the monsters they faced became a lot stronger, so they couldn't continue pressing forward with their current party composition. Around that time was when Selma's influence started spreading, so their party decided that they needed to get an enchanter, and since Orhan is someone who can pretty much learn anything, the role fell to him. That sounds pretty rough, but on the bright side, Orhan's sacrifice is what allowed them to make it all the way to the 94th floor. However, Orhan tells them that it wasn't actually a good thing. Yes, his switch did make them progress faster, but the best thing to do would have been to take it slow and gradually build their strength because they weren't ready for what was on the 94th floor. And he knows for a fact that there is absolutely no chance of the hero party making it past that floor as they are right now, and even attempting it would be stupid. The others can tell that Orhan got a bit tense there, so they change the subject and ask him what kind of swordsman he wants to become. Orhan tells them he aspires to be a jack of all trades, swordsman, someone who can make it through even lower floors all on his own. The others are amazed since they have never heard of a dream like that, but if it's Orhan, they are sure he could pull it off. The next day, we see the hero party heading right into the dungeon, and remember how Orhan said it would be stupid of them to try to get past the 94th floor as they are now. Yeah, it looks like they are about to do something stupid. The next morning, Orhan returns to the dungeon entrance for the final stretch of the expedition, and he is immediately greeted by the kids. Caroline decides to give Sophia a chance to talk to Orhan, so she mentions that it would be really nice if they got a reward after completing the expedition. She then nudges Sophia to remind her about how she wanted to ask Orhan to officially join their guild, but just as she's about to say it, Selma suddenly calls Orhan over, so he is forced to step away for now. As Orhan is walking over to Selma, he hears a bunch of the students talking about how the hero party is attempting to make it to the deepest part of the dungeon today. They are apparently starting on floor 92, and when Orhan hears this, he pauses for a moment because he can't believe they would do something so risky, especially when they just replaced him with a new member a few days ago and haven't had time to practice yet. He starts stressing out about how badly it is going to go, but then he remembers, wait a minute, this isn't my problem anymore. Meanwhile, the hero party have just arrived on the 92nd floor of the southern dungeon with their new recruit, Philly Carpenter. For some reason, they didn't bother testing their teamwork before this, but in their defense, Philly's application was stacked. 2 days ago, Philly was introduced to everyone, and she has apparently gone all the way down to the 100th floor of the western dungeon before, so naturally they assume that it should be easy for her to help them do the same in the southern dungeon. And Ellie and Derek are sure that Philly's support spells will be better than anything Orhan could possibly do, and they quickly start spiraling into how much they hated him. Derek and Anelli were especially annoyed since Orhan would never let them throw extravagant parties even though they've got tons of money in the party's bank account. And hearing them talk like that is already raising red flags for Philly, because those two sound like they would be broke by now if Orhan hadn't been managing their finances. Oliver cuts in and tells everyone to stop talking about Orhan because today is supposed to be about welcoming Philly to the party. Just then, Luna barged in because she had just found out about Orhan joining the Silver Rabbits expedition, so imagine her surprise when she found out that the others had already replaced Orhan without consulting her first. She asked them why Orhan is with the Silver Rabbits now, and both Derek and Anneli can barely believe that Orhan managed to join such a high-profile guild in just a few days. But it doesn't change anything because he's no longer a member of their party. At first, when Luna heard this, she thought Orhan had given up on carrying the party because they were holding him back, but Derek proudly states that they were the ones who kicked him out. Luna is at a loss for words because she hasn't heard of such a dumb decision since the Sissy and Kingsman drama. She reminds them that Orhan was literally the core of their party, and without him, they never would have gotten this far to begin with, but the others refuse to accept that. Derek says that no matter how highly Luna thinks of Orhan, he is always going to be a substandard loser of an enchanter, and besides, he's already gone, so there's no point in complaining about it now. Luna doesn't like it, but she knows there's no way she can convince Orhan to come back now, so she just grits her teeth and accepts that they've lost him. The others take Luna's silence to mean she finally agrees with them, so Oliver decides to go 2 for 2 on dumb decisions and announces that he wants to test out Philly's synergy with the party down on floor 92. And if that goes well, then they will move on to the 94th floor to beat their record. Luna immediately objects to the idea because she enjoys being alive. She tells Oliver that if he wants to test out Philly's capabilities so badly, then it would be better to do so on one of the lower floors like floor 30 for safety. But they all look at her like she just started speaking a foreign language. With how stupid these guys are, I'm surprised they lasted this long to begin with, and for some reason, they don't seem to grasp how dangerous it is to attempt to train a new team member on a floor that they barely beat last time. Derek and Anneli admit that it was a close call last time, but they are sure that Orhan is the only reason they had a tough time back then, So, with someone like Philly who's bound to be 1,000 times better, there should be no problems. Luna is still against this because there's a black dragon on that floor, and she doesn't want to be roasted alive. But Oliver tells her that they are doing this whether she likes it or not, and she isn't allowed to refuse. Not gonna lie, she probably should have quit right then, but she didn't want to give up on the party just yet, so she went along with it, and it's going just as bad as she thought it would. The party is currently up against a giant mammoth, which they would normally have no trouble defeating, but when they try to attack it, Oliver's sword does absolutely no damage. Derek can barely block any of the mammoth's attacks, and Annelli's fire magic might as well be a bunch of sparklers. None of them understands what's going on since they thought their attacks would get stronger now that they have Philly casting the buff spells, but it's the exact opposite. Philly can barely maintain her buffs on the party, and since she's completely preoccupied, she can't analyze the battlefield to give them instructions, so it's up to them to make decisions on their own. And if you've been paying attention to their track record, they are 0-3 for good decisions. Oliver's brain cells finally start functioning again as he realizes that he and the others in the party are actually way weaker than he thought, but he still doesn't understand why. This entire time, Luna has just been standing off to the side, watching the whole thing unfold, and she's about to explain where they went wrong now that reality has hit everyone, but all of a sudden, they all hear a terrifying roar as something approaches them, and it's the black dragon that Luna was worried about. The dragon lands, squishing the mammoth in an instant and knocking everyone off their feet, so Luna yells that they need to run away, but apparently, Derek and Annalie are still brain cells deficient, because even though they just saw the thing one-shot the mammoth they were struggling to damage, they still think they stand a chance of beating it, and Oliver joined in on their delusional optimism. They've defeated the dragon once before, so he assumes they should be able to do so again, but that was only because Orhan was here with them, and it seems they still don't understand that. Derek runs out in front to attempt to block one of the dragon's fireballs, but he did not know what he was signing up for, because immediately that fire hit, he was knocked to the floor like a piece of burnt toast. Luna immediately rushes over to start healing him, and Philly is frozen stiff with fear, regretting every decision that led her to join this party. Annelli attempts to cast a fire javelin at the dragon, and she succeeds, but that might have actually done negative damage, because the dragon was completely unaffected, and she is left dumbfounded. Thanks to her little flame attack, the dragon now has its eyes on her, so it launches a fireball at Annelli, and she tries to hide behind a rock for safety, but she still gets blown back several feet. Oliver is having a panic attack as he watches everything go wrong, so Luna yells at him to snap out of it because they all need to escape before it's too late. He finally snaps back to his senses and agrees that Luna is right, but they've got a bit of a problem on their hands because the dragon is charging up a fire blast, and both Derek and Annelli are still unconscious. Luna asks Oliver to buy her some time while she heals those two, so he calls over to Philly to snap her out of her daze and order her to cast as many buffs on him as possible. Philly does as instructed, so Oliver begins charging up his ultimate move. However, as Oliver's slash clashes with the dragon's fireball, it is completely negated, and he is sent flying back as well. Oliver falls into despair because if even his strongest attack couldn't damage the dragon, then what are they supposed to do? Luna is disappointed to see Oliver in such a weak-willed state, even though he is supposed to be the leader. But since things have come to this, she says their only option is to use the fickle gate they keep for emergencies. The fickle gate is a magic item that can forcefully create a connection between levels of the dungeon, allowing adventurers to travel from one floor to another instantly, but it is risky because you are teleported to another floor's boss room, and the floor number is completely random. Philly thinks it's too dangerous since the second they step through, they will have to fight the boss of another floor. But it's not like they stand any chance of beating the dragon if they stay, so they are going to have to use the gate and pray they get sent to one of the easier floors. Oliver activates the gate, and after picking up Derek and Annelli, they prepare to jump through. But at the last second, the dragon suddenly blocks their path with a wall of fire, and as it is charging towards them, it ends up going through the gate instead. After the dragon is gone, Derek breathes a sigh of relief because they won't have to deal with it anymore, but Luna yells that this is the worst thing that could have happened. Oliver soon realizes that this means the dragon must have been teleported to a random boss area in the dungeon, so it's entirely possible that a bunch of newbies are about to encounter a dragon because of them. Luna tells everyone that they need to get back to the guild and warn them so they can force teleport all the adventurers out as soon as possible. All guild cards come with a feature that allows them to forcibly transport registered members out of the dungeon in cases of emergency, so it's their best bet to make sure no one is hurt. Oliver is a little worried because they are bound to receive a ton of penalties from the guild for this mess, but making sure no one gets hurt is more important to him, so he prepares to head back to the guild right away. However, Luna reminds him that Anneli and Derek are still too weak to walk, so he is going to have to wait for her to finish healing then before they can leave. As Luna heals the two of them, she reminds Oliver that they are going to have to fight the dragon after they request the forced teleport, and when that happens, she needs him to swap Philly out with Orhun. Oliver wasn't expecting to hear that from her, and in truth, Luna hates the idea of making Orhun fix their mess after everything this party has put him through, but they've got no choice. She was interrupted before she could explain this earlier, but the reason everyone seems so weak now is because Orhun isn't here. She tells them that individually, none of them have gotten any weaker, but Oliver doesn't believe her because his divine slash couldn't even scratch the dragon. However, Luna explains that it was because of Oliver's own carelessness. The strength of a support spell depends on the caster, while the duration depends on the magic resistance of the recipient, and Oliver happens to have really high magic resistance, so Philly's spells only last around 1 minute for him before she needs to recast them. This was never a problem for Orhun since he was able to keep track of spell timings well. Oliver argues that Philly should be able to do the same since she has more talent as an enchanter than Orhun did, and Luna agrees that Orhun's innate talent as an enchanter was subpar. But that's exactly why he came up with several original spells to make up for his weaknesses. The others are completely shocked because this is the first time they are hearing of this, and a mage coming up with an original spell is extremely rare. Orhun's base enchantments are indeed weaker than average, but he was able to come up with an original spell that boosted his spell potency by 50 times. Philly finds that hard to believe since even Selma was only ever able to boost her spells by 10 times, but it's the truth. Oliver's divine slash works by gathering energy and releasing it all at once, and in theory, if he had spent more time gathering energy, he would have been able to do some damage to the dragon, but he got so used to Orhun's buffs, making the skill more efficient that he started putting in less effort, and the same goes with Anneli as well. She got so used to Orhun's buffs that she defaulted to only using mid-tier spells instead of advanced ones because they were easier to cast. On top of that, Orhun's spells also work on equipment as well, so all their attacks and defenses had become overwhelmingly reliant on Orhun's magic without them realizing it. All of their brain cells suddenly spring back to life as they finally realize how vital Orhun was to the party. But moments later, Oliver's intelligence takes a sharp nosedive as his ego takes over, and he convinces himself that his defeating the dragon once before had nothing to do with Orhun, even though we can clearly see Orhun carrying the team in the flashback. As for Orhun and the others, today is the last day of the expedition, so they will be starting out on the 36th floor and progressing until they make it to the 50th floor, after which they will all teleport out of the dungeon safely. It seems fairly straightforward, but for some reason, Orhun has a bad feeling about all of this. It's true that they are going to be facing monsters that the new recruits can't handle on their own, but with all the supervisors, including him, actively participating, it should be doable. Yet he is getting a terrible feeling from the dungeon today, and he can't put his finger on it. He continues trying to think of a possible reason, but he then gets distracted by the kids calling out to him out of excitement, and against his better judgment, he decides to brush aside his worries for now. Caroline keeps asking Orhun for tips to improve her fighting skills since she wants to kill as many monsters as possible, but Orhun tells her that there's a limit to how much she can do while she's still a newbie. He reminds her that her job as a defender is to protect the party, so she shouldn't be too focused on charging ahead all the time, but she says it's no fun that way. Logan chimes in and tells Caroline to be grateful for Orhun's advice since even Albert used to say the same thing. But hearing that name catches Orhun's attention since Albert Sensible was the famous ace adventurer of the Silver Rabbit Guild. He died last year while facing the Black Dragon on floor 92, and Caroline seems to know quite a bit about it because Albert apparently died protecting one of his teammates even though that was the defender's job, and she doesn't want to let something like that happen to her team, which is why she is always running out ahead of the others. Orhun can tell by the look in her eyes that there's some deep-seated trauma there, and he's not getting paid to be a therapist, so he just pretends he didn't see that and tries to move on. But just then, Sophia speaks up and asks Orhun if there are any tips he can give her since she wants to know what she should improve on, and Logan also asks for some advice as well. A little while later, they've all made their way into the dungeon, and while they are taking a break, Selma walks up to Orhun to mention that she thinks it's nice how much the kids have warmed up to him recently. He admits that he was a little worried about how they might treat him after that newspaper article came out, but they all accepted him regardless. Selma recalls hearing Orhun and the kids talking about Albert earlier, so she talks about how devastating his loss was for the Silver Rabbits. After that, Orhun and the heroes' party went on to defeat the Black Dragon, but it was unbelievably difficult, so Orhun knew Albert didn't die because he was weak. It was just an unfortunate set of events. Selma goes on to talk about how hard it has been to find someone capable enough to replace the hole in the guild that Albert left behind, and Orhan knows she's trying to use this as an opportunity to recruit him, but he's not interested. He tells her that one party doesn't need two enchanters, and Selma understands that, but since Orhan said he's switching to swordsmanship, she still thinks he would be a valuable asset to the team. After that, the mission officially starts and everyone is briefed on the plan before they head out. Orhan and the others get assigned to Group 10, so they are at the very end of the formation, but that just means they are seen as the most promising members of the group. Sofia is a little nervous since they are practically on their own back here, but Orhan says this is a necessary experience since with how complicated a dungeon's layout can be, they are going to need to learn how to navigate it on their own in case they get split up from the rest of the group. Logan agrees with Orhan, but Caroline still doesn't like the idea of potentially getting lost down here. Orhan says that's why it's important to spend time gathering information for the dungeon dive in advance, especially with maps of the dungeon layout so you don't get caught off guard by any surprises. In that case, Caroline asks Orhan to share some of his information with them since he has gone further into the dungeon than the rest of them combined, and they'd like to learn a bit about the deepest floors of the dungeon. Orhan sees no harm in talking about it, so he tells the kids that the lower floors officially start around floor 76, and the floors from there are usually ice or snow themed. As for the deepest floors, those don't start until you get to floor 91, but he barely has a chance to actually explain anything about the floor because the others keep interrupting him with questions over and over. Meanwhile, back on the surface, Luna arrives at the Adventurers Guild with the rest of the hero party, and she immediately asks to meet with the guild master because she has something important to tell him. One of the receptionists, Eleanor, informs Luna that the guild master is currently in a meeting, so she's going to have to wait a while if she wants to meet with him, but Luna frantically tells her there's no time because they need to force teleport everyone out of the dungeon immediately. Back in the dungeon, the group continues traveling through the dungeon, but they are all starting to get the feeling that something is wrong here. For one, they haven't seen even a single monster in a while, and with a room this big, there should have been a ton of them. Logan asks Orhan if this is what it's usually like on floor 40, but he has never seen anything like this before. It's almost as if the monsters are all scared of something, but he has no idea what it could be. Caroline is starting to get frustrated since she really wants to fight something, and as luck would have it, there happens to be a lone goblin nearby, so she immediately charges at it. Orhan tries to warn her to stop because that goblin is strong enough to one-tap her, but Caroline completely ignores him. So Orhan is forced to save her and debuffs the goblin in order to buy her enough time to take it out. Caroline then cheerfully announces that she has defeated the goblin, but the others tell her that what she just did was extremely reckless. At first, she doesn't care. But then they point out that if Orhan hadn't been here, she could have gotten herself into danger, and then Sofia and Logan would have been forced to go save her, so she would be putting her party's safety at risk. Caroline realizes that she was wrong and apologizes for her mistake, but as long as she is more careful in the future, Orhan isn't going to hold it against her. In fact, since Caroline loves fighting monsters so much even though she's a defender, Orhan offers to teach her a special technique called active defense. Caroline gets all excited and asks him to explain more about it, so Orhan tells her that it's a method of drawing your enemy's attacks to keep them busy while the rest of your party prepares a counterattack. Every living thing has to physically prepare before launching an attack, but if you can interrupt that preparation, then you can effectively stun-lock your enemy for a short time. But to do this, you need to be able to study your opponent's attack patterns and strike just before they unleash their Ada. Caroline thinks that sounds like a really cool way to defeat monsters, but Orhan reminds her that the goal isn't to defeat the monsters. Her goal should be to simply stall them from attacking until her teammates are ready, and Caroline says she understands. Meanwhile, up on the surface, the guild master is meeting with the hero party, but he has no idea what was so important that they had to call him out so suddenly. Luna speaks up and tells him that they need to force teleport everyone out of the dungeon right now, but the guild master is hesitant to comply since teleportation on that scale costs an enormous amount of mana, so they can't do it unless it's a serious emergency. But the situation can't get much more serious than it already is. Luna explains that the Black Dragon managed to travel through her fickle gate and is currently on a random floor in the dungeon. If nothing is done, someone will end up running into it sooner or later, so they need to act quickly. However, according to the rules, the guild master still needs to hold a discussion before activating the forced teleport. Meanwhile, back in the dungeon, Logan asks Orhan to teach him how to use debuff spells, but Orhan doesn't think that would be a good idea considering how difficult it is to master. The effectiveness of a debuff spell is largely dependent on the magic resistance of the target, so for Logan to use it effectively, He would both need to master the nuance of the spell and learn the individual magic resistance for every single monster in the dungeon. On top of that, debuff magic isn't particularly effective against monsters in the deeper floors, so it's not practical to learn as a main skill. However, Orhun does know of a trick that could be useful to him. He points to a pair of wolves that are charging this way, but instead of doing anything to attack those wolves, Orhun just waits, and after a few seconds, they trigger one of the traps he had laid beforehand. The others are amazed since they've never seen anything like it before. So Orhun explains that it's a simple trick that comes in handy to prevent enemies from sneaking up on the party as they progress through the dungeon, and Logan would do well to learn the technique since it's an enchanter's job to maintain the battlefield advantage for his party. Orhun then turns to Sophia and tells her that if she wants to grow stronger, then she should learn to use parallel casting. She is already able to use special grade spells, but those kinds of spells take time to activate, so she learned how to parallel cast. She could begin casting a second one halfway through the first one to reduce downtime. It will take a bit of effort to master, but anyone can learn to cast at least 2 spells at once given enough time, so Orhun tells her to give it a try once the mission is over. He says she can probably get Selma to teach her later, and he's right about that, but she says she would actually prefer it if Orhun taught her instead. He's surprised to hear her say that, and he'd like to turn her down, but he can't say no to a face like that, so he agrees to train her later. Meanwhile, back on the surface, the preparations for the forced teleportation are finally ready, so once the spell is fully charged, the Guildmaster will initiate the teleportation. After that, he says he wants the hero party to go back into the dungeon and defeat the Black Dragon, but they all tense up upon hearing that because they know there's no way they could beat that thing. Anneli tries to make up an excuse about them, needing time to recover from their previous battle, but Luna cuts her off and tells the Guildmaster that they will head back into the dungeon to kill the dragon as soon as possible. However, there is one request. Down in the dungeon, the group eventually makes it to the floor boss room, and since this one is a little too advanced for the recruits, the supervisors are going to handle it on their own. Orhun heads to the front lines with the rest of the supervisors, and as soon as the battle begins, he rushes forward to distract the troll while everyone else prepares an attack. Orhun masterfully controls the movement on the battlefield, and thanks to him, they manage to take the troll out within a few minutes, so everything is going really well. However, on the hero party's end, the situation is really bad. They are on their way back to the dungeon with Luna taking the lead, but the others are confused as to why she asked the Guildmaster to teleport the people on floors 40 to 50 out first. Luna explains that it's because Orhun is likely on one of those floors, and they are going to need his help if they plan on beating the dragon. On Orhun's end, he and the others have finally made it to the boss room of the 50th floor, and they've just taken out the crab monster here, so the mission is officially over. However, just when Orhun thought he could finally relax, the space above everyone begins to crack and the black dragon suddenly appears, leaving everyone terrified. Selma and the other supervisors are all left speechless because they know how dangerous that dragon is, and even Orhun has no idea how to handle this because there's no way they can defeat this thing as they are now. The only real option they have is to try and get past the dragon or make it to the teleportation crystal, but that's a lot easier said than done, especially when everyone else is too terrified to even move. Monsters usually target large crowds of people, so they will likely be the dragon's first victims, and Orhun knows that means he can survive if he runs away on his own, but there's no way he would ever leave those kids behind, so he decides to take his chances and fight the black dragon to the death. He yells at the other supervisor and orders them to do everything in their power to keep the kids alive, so they snap out of the fearful daze and get into a defensive position while Orhun charges at the dragon. Just as Orhun predicted, the dragon aims its fireball straight at the group, and even though they've already got a barrier up, they all know there's no way the barrier can tank a blast of dragon's breath like that. However, at the moment of impact, Orhun managed to cast a split-second buff to strengthen the barrier enough for everyone to survive. It was so quick that hardly anyone besides Selma could tell that Orhun's support magic had been used, but he's got much bigger problems to deal with right now. He is currently trying to find an opening to attack the dragon, so he throws a dagger at the dragon's eye, and while the dragon managed to close its eyes on time to protect itself. That's exactly what Orhun expected to happen. With the dragon's eyes closed, he jumps into the air and aims for its neck with a strike so powerful that it causes a small explosion. The others are amazed that Orhun could unleash such power with a single strike, but even an attack like that still wasn't enough to defeat the dragon. In fact, it looks like the dragon was completely unharmed, which has everyone really worried, but Orhun assures them there's no need to worry because he has a plan. He puts on a special necklace and charges back in to attack the dragon, and as the dragon shoots a fireball at him, Orhun redirects it with a reflective wall spell. Logan is amazed by what he just saw because he has never heard of a spell that redirects attacks back towards the enemies, and that's because this is one of Orhan's original spells. Orhan had hoped that the dragon's fire would be strong enough to wound it, but it's still perfectly fine, so he is going to have to take some drastic measures. He casts a status boost spell on himself, a spell which doubles the stats of all skills of his core attributes. But Selma is still concerned because even if Orhan is strong, merely doubling his stats won't be enough to compete with the dragon's power. However, Orhan never intended to stop at just doubling his power, so he proceeds to cast status boost on himself 4 more times, raising his power to 32 times the original. Selma is left in utter disbelief because normally, if you try to cast the same spell multiple times, it just resets the duration of the spell without stacking its effects, so she has no idea how Orhan managed to pull off such an unbelievable feat, but something tells her this isn't the only trick Orhan has up his sleeve. With the 32 times boost, Orhan can now move so fast that the others can't even keep track of him, but he can't keep this up for long, since casting the equivalent of 30 spells at once takes a huge toll on his body. He wants to end the battle as soon as possible, so he jumps straight at the dragon again, but while he's midair, the dragon begins swinging its tail to knock Orhan out of the sky. However, Orhan is able to create a floating platform under his feet to avoid the tail swipe. The platform Orhan just created wasn't the result of a spell, it was the work of Orhan's special ability, a power that some humans happen to possess. In Orhan's case, his ability is magical convergence, which allows him to gather magic in a single point and materialize it. He is also able to use raw magic to propel himself through the air, so his ability is extremely versatile in combat, but that doesn't mean it's exclusive to Orhan. Oliver also happens to have the same ability, but instead of using it for mobility, he uses it to strengthen his attacks. Orhan casts a series of buffs on his sword as he goes in for another strike, and this time, he actually manages to do a decent amount of damage to the dragon. But the strain from maintaining all his buffs is starting to catch up to him. Selma can see that Orhan is struggling out there, but the other supervisors aren't strong enough to keep up with the dragon, and even if she joined the fight without them, she doesn't think she would be of much help to Orhan. This is the first time Selma has felt genuine terror in a long time, so her body won't stop shaking no matter how hard she tries, but she's still going to do her best to make sure the students are kept safe so Orhan can focus on his battle. Years ago, back when Orhan was still a kid, he would spend all day playing with Luna and Oliver in the village, and they all lived in harmony. But that all changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Orhan and Oliver had been outside the village training one day, and by the time they returned, they found that the entire village had been burnt to the ground by bandits, and everyone they knew had been slaughtered in the streets. The two of them were completely heartbroken and hated themselves for not being able to protect any of the people they cared about, but there was nothing they could do at that point. They spent the rest of the day burying the bodies of all their friends and family who had been killed in the attack, and from that day forward, Orhan and Oliver both swore to each other that they would become strong enough to make sure a tragedy like this never happens again. That is a promise that Orhan has worked his entire life to fulfill, and there's no way he's going to let a single dragon stand in the way of him protecting his friends. The purple mist surrounding the dragon right now is an indication that it's about to unleash its most powerful attack, so Selma wonders what Orhan plans to do here. He figures out that the purple mist probably works the same as magical convergence, meaning the dragon is currently gathering energy for its attack. The dragon uses that energy to form weapons in all different directions, but the last time Orhan fought one of these things, it was using way more weapons than this, so the dragon must still be underestimating him. He intends to take advantage of that, so as the dragon begins firing at Orhan, he dashes from left to right to avoid getting hit and then uses a fireball to distract the dragon while he gets close enough to strike again. But unfortunately, with the extra energy the dragon has accumulated, its scales have become too tough for Orhan to cut through. To make matters worse, Orhan barely has any breathing room since the dragon is constantly bombarding him with mana attacks, so he puts up a rock wall to protect himself. But that didn't work out as well as he had hoped because the dragon was able to bank one of the spears around his wall, leaving Orhan completely vulnerable. Fortunately, Orhan had precast a reflective wall spell in case of situations like this, but he genuinely could have died just now. The others continue to watch with bated breath as they hope for Orhan's victory, but Selma doesn't think it's going to be that easy because while Orhan has managed to keep up with the dragon so far, he still hasn't landed any decisive blows yet. Fighting solo is way tougher than Orhan thought it would be, because as much as he hates his former party for betraying him, he can't deny that they were really useful. Last time they faced a dragon, Derek and Luna blocked all its mana attacks, and Nelly provided perfect cover fire, and Oliver's Divine Flash was strong enough to finish the job, but without them here, Orhan is basically forced to do all their jobs at once, He knows it won't be easy, but failure isn't an option for him, so he's just going to have to find a way to make it work. He begins using the active defense techniques he taught Caroline to keep the dragon off balance and disrupt its attack pattern, while also drawing it away so the dragon doesn't send any attacks towards the students. Once he is a safe distance away from everyone else, Orhun unleashes a wide range of fire blast spells on the dragon all at once. The dragon remains mostly unharmed, but Orhun already knew this wouldn't be enough to take it out for good, which is why he made a few tweaks to his fireball spells a moment ago. He modified and turned them into traps that absorb ambient mana to reactivate at regular intervals with greater intensity, meaning they will keep blasting the dragon over and over until Orhun cancels the spell. The blasts chip away at a lot of the dragon's health, but it refuses to go down and eventually manages to destroy all the magic circles. Fortunately, Orhun still has a few more tricks up his sleeve, and since Oliver was the one who dealt the final blow last time with Divine Slash, Orhun decides to do the same thing with his own version of the move. As the dragon launches a fireball his way, Orhun unleashes his Divine Slash, and to make sure it doesn't get blocked, he casts an impact puff on it the moment it comes into contact with the dragon's fire, allowing the slash to go further with more force until it eventually hits the dragon head-on. This results in a huge explosion. A piece of the dragon soon falls to the floor, leading everyone to believe that Orhun was successful in taking it down. But on the contrary, the dragon is still very much alive. It turns out that it sacrificed its tail in order to block Orhun's slash, which Orhun didn't account for at all, but in hindsight, he should have expected as much from such a powerful boss. The dragon starts firing even more blasts at Orhun, so he starts running around some more to evade, but midway through, the timer on his buffs runs out, so his strength has gone back to normal. Selma sees this and tries to help Orhun by casting her own status buff on him, but Orhun cancels that shit immediately and tells her to stay out of this because her buffs aren't strong enough to make a difference in this situation. He tells her to just focus on protecting the students because he is perfectly fine handling the dragon on his own, and as he says this, he casts another quintuple status boost on himself before hitting the dragon with a buff Thunder Shock spell. The force of the blast knocks the dragon clean out of the sky, and as it crashes into the ground, the others wonder if Orhun finally managed to kill it, but no, the dragon is somehow still alive. Orhun can hardly believe that the dragon isn't dead yet, because he's running out of tricks to pull out here. His sword is already way past its limit and shatters in Orhun's hands, but the dragon is also on its last legs, so one more solid attack should be enough to take it out. Orhun drops his broken sword and decides to bust out his trump card, so he casts his destruction spell and summons his pure black great sword, a weapon which none of the others have ever seen him use. The destruction spell is one which compresses highly amplified magic into the shape of a sword on par with a special rank spell. Orhun then jumps at the dragon for one final face-off, but instead of charging at it head-on, he bounces himself off dozens of reflective walls, scattered all across the battlefield to speed himself up before finally striking the dragon from above and finishing it off once and for all. Back on the surface, Orhun's old party is rushing back to the dungeon when the forced teleportation activates, pulling everyone within the dungeon back to the surface as planned. But to their shock, just as they were about to head inside, they came face to face with the black dragon. They were all startled initially, but Luna soon realizes that the dragon is dead and must have been teleported along with some adventurers, and standing next to the dragon's corpse, she spots Orhun leaning on his sword with the last of his strength. She can see that his body is in terrible shape, so she rushes over to heal him, but Orhun stops her and instead asks that she just handle the rest of the cleanup for him because he just wants to go home and take a nap. It is at this moment that Luna realizes that Orhun is the only person who looks hurt on his team, and that must mean he took down the dragon all on his own, which sounds unbelievable. And speaking of unbelievable, Derek flat out refuses to believe it, and no amount of evidence or facts will change his mind. Orhun already knows it would be a waste of breath to try talking to a blockhead like him, so he ignores Derek's provocation and continues walking home, which only makes Derek even more angry. Just then, Luna yells at Derek and tells him to quit making a fool of himself because in plain terms, he's a bum, and he's going to stay a bum until he can accept that he is weaker without Orhun's help. Hearing such a logical statement sends Derek into a rage, so he charges at Luna. But he wasn't joking when she called Derek a bum, because she was able to freeze him in place without so much as lifting a finger. And she could have ended Bro's entire career right here if she wanted, but Oliver yelled for the two of them to stop fighting. However, even though it's plain as day that he was wrong about Orhun being weak, Oliver still refuses to admit to himself that he was the problem. After everyone returned home, The kids were tasked with filling out reports on what happened during the expedition, so Sophia plans to write all about how amazing Orhun is. She is really excited to get started, but a moment later, Selma returns home, and she looks absolutely exhausted. She collapses into bed without a word, and Sophia wants to do something nice for her, so she suggests she and Selma should go take a bath together to relax. Selma is completely on board with the idea, so they immediately head to the bathhouse. And while they are soaking, Selma asks Sophia what she thought of Orhun's performance earlier today. Sophia is kind of at a loss because what she saw made her realize that Orhun is so strong that she can't even begin to understand what he did. However, Sophia says it wasn't that hard for her to keep track of what Orhun was doing. Selma is shocked to hear her say that and immediately sits up to ask what Sophia managed to see during Orhun's fight. Sophia explains that while Orhun's power and movements were completely unmatched, everything else he did was pretty much just the basics. He simply used the techniques he had been taught about active defense, magic use, and enchantment, but it's still amazing that he managed to play the part of those roles all by himself. Selma is amazed that Sophia could grasp so much from Orhun's amazing display, and she's feeling quite inferior now since she knows there's no way she can ever match up to Orhun's power. But Sophia says she still respects Selma most of all, and nothing will ever change that, so she tells her not to push herself too hard. Speaking of pushing yourself too hard, the next morning, Orhun is suffering the after effects of overexerting himself against the dragon. He knew this would happen, and he actually considers himself lucky, because considering how much magic he used, he got off easy with just a little body pain. He gets up to look out the window, and surprisingly, he spots Selma on her way over here. A few minutes later, the two meet up in a cafe, and Selma apologizes for bothering him like this, but she really wanted to check up on him to make sure he's alright. Orhun tells her there's no reason to be worried because he's perfectly fine, but he does appreciate the fact that she came all this way to see him. Selma gets up and formally thanks Orhun, because he is the sole reason that they managed to complete the expedition without a single casualty, and she is eternally grateful for what he has done. She asks Orhun if he would be willing to come to her clan since the leader wants to meet him, and since he's not particularly busy today, Orhun agrees. After arriving at the clan, the leader gets straight to the point and asks Orhun if he wants to join the Silver Rabbit clan. He tells Orhun that he can join as a frontline attacker for Unit 1, their most powerful group of adventurers, and he will be instantly promoted to a lieutenant if he joins. Orhun is shocked to hear that since it's unheard of for someone as young as him to become a lieutenant, but the leader insists that Orhun has more than enough experience and skill to qualify for the position. Orhun is flattered by the offer, and pretty much any other person would have jumped at the opportunity, but he doesn't want to give an answer right away, so he asks them to give him some time to think it over. The clan leader understands and tells Orhun he can take as much time as he needs, but as Orhun is leaving, he is informed that the leader of the Adventurers Guild wants to see him as well, so he decides to head there next. On the way over, Orhun thinks about the offer from the Silver Rabbits, and it truly is a good deal, but he can't help but worry that things might end up the same way as they did with his old team, and that's the last thing he would want to happen. He doesn't even want to think about those jerks after all they've put him through, but unfortunately, when he arrives for the meeting with the guild master, he finds out that his old party members are present as well. Anyway, the meeting begins, and the guild master mentions that all reports say Orhun killed the Black Dragon, so he asks Orhun if this is true, and he confirms it, but a second later, Derek and Anelli scoff and tell Orhun he should be thanking them because he just got lucky enough to land the final hit after they weakened the dragon, and I'm honestly impressed, because this level of delusion is on par with that of the Gojo resurrection stands. Orhun rightfully tells Derek to shut his mouth because he's too stupid to form a valid opinion, and Derek is about to throw a fit, but the guild master tells him to sit his ass down before he gets suspended. Orhun then addresses Oliver and asks him why on earth he thought it was a good idea to take his new enchanter down to the 92nd floor of the dungeon on her first day. He asks if he really thought it would be easy, simply because he had been to the floor before, and Orhun hit the nail right on the head there, but Oliver is too proud to admit it. Orhun begins laying into him for his stupid decision, because he remembers specifically warning Oliver not to go there because he wasn't strong enough to handle it yet. Orhun recalls that, but he thought that if they got an enchanter with magic that's even more effective than Orhun's, then it would be easy to make it through the deeper floors. At this point, Orhun isn't even mad about the whole getting fired thing, but he is mad about the fact that Oliver doesn't seem to grasp how important an enchanter's job really is. Oliver retorts and yells that he completely understands the worth of an enchanter, which is why he got a new one, but from the way he's talking about it, it's clear to Orhun that he doesn't understand a single thing about what enchanters really do. Orhan starts listing off the individual magic resistance and buff durations for each member of the team, and he explains that an enchanter would need to keep track of all the numbers while giving the party orders and following their opponent's movements as well. And he wants to know if Oliver thinks he could pull that off if he tried. Meanwhile, back at the Silver Rabbit clan, Logan, Sophia, and Caroline are all walking through the halls and talking about what Orhan might do in the future. None of them have heard much from Orhan since yesterday, but they think it would be really cool if he were to join the Silver Rabbits since they would be able to spend more time with him. So they decide to go ask him to join. Meanwhile, out in the garden, Selma is sitting by herself thinking about Orhan as well, and she would love it if Orhan joined the clan, but she doubts Orhan would want to be comrades with someone like her. After all, with the power gap between them, there's nothing she could possibly do to support Orhan, and teaming up with her would only slow him down. A few moments later, the kids come running up to Selma and ask her if she knows where Orhan lives. Selma asks them why they want Orhan's address, so they explain that they plan to ask Orhan to join the clan, but Selma doesn't think that's a good idea. She wants Orhan to join as well, but she tells the kids they would only be holding Orhan back if they convinced him to join. However, the kids were already fully aware of this, and they know it's a selfish choice to intentionally hold Orhan back, but there's so much they could learn from him, and they want to grow up to be strong enough to genuinely stand by Orhan's side as equals. Hearing this makes Selma realize that there's a lot she could learn from Orhan as well, and even if she's not a good match for him right now, she can always work on growing stronger to close the gap between the two of them. For this reason, she agrees to let the kids try to convince Orhan, but she's not going to dox him for no reason, so instead of telling them his address, she informs them that Orhan recently had a meeting at the guild, so if they hurry, they might be able to find him before he leaves. Meanwhile, Orhan had just left the guild, and since he has given his statement, his former party is going to be hit with a penalty for the trouble they caused. He prepares to head home for the day, but all of a sudden, he spots the kids running his way, and for some reason, he gets the feeling talking to them will be troublesome, so he ducks into an alleyway and starts running. Unfortunately, his injuries from yesterday make it tough for him to outrun them, so instead, Orhan creates a few mana platforms and hops onto one of the roofs to get away from them. He watches the kids run by from above and he breathes a sigh of relief as they pass, but he still needs to lay low, so he ends up running into his Gram's store. The old man is confused by the fact that Orhan is trying to hide from a bunch of kids, so he asks what's going on, and Orhan explains that he's worried they are going to ask him to join the Silver Rabbit because he already decided to reject the offer, and he doesn't want to hurt their feelings by telling them no. The old man can tell that Orhan must care about those kids a lot to want to spare them the disappointment, but they seem to look up to him quite a bit. So the man tells him that he doesn't necessarily need to go through life alone because of what happened, and hearing that gives Orhan a lot to think about. Later that night, Orhan heads to a hilltop to think things through, but to his surprise, Sophia shows up soon after him. She is surprised to see him here since she just happened to be passing through, but since he's here, she uses the opportunity to thank Orhan properly for saving them. She then asks Orhan to join the Silver Rabbits, but before giving her an answer, Orhan asks what Sophia thinks of the Silver Rabbits. She says the Silver Rabbits have taught her so much and given her so many happy memories, but most of all, she says it's the place she belongs, and that statement strikes a chord with Orhan. So he has finally made his decision. The next morning, Orhan meets with the clan leader and informs him that he would like to accept his offer and join the Silver Rabbits. The leader is happy to hear it, so Selma brings in a uniform for Orhan to make it official. Once the others learn that Orhan is officially a member, they all run over to give him a warm welcome, to which Orhan says he looks forward to working with them. Years ago, Orhan and Oliver used to train together all the time, and on one particular day, Orhan lost to Oliver in a duel. Seeing Oliver beat Orhan, the adults who were watching the fight conclude that Oliver is the best candidate to use to further their objectives. And Oliver gets really mad at him and tells Orhan to stop messing around because he knows Orhan is stronger than this. However, Orhan just casually tells Oliver that he simply became stronger than him, and there's nothing else to it. Oliver then stomps off because he knows Orhan is intentionally losing the matches, but he can't prove it, and it turns out that he was right. Orhan really was throwing the fight, and he could have absolutely demolished Oliver if he tried to. A few minutes later, a girl named Sion walks up to Orhan and tells him he is terrible at fake losing. She tells him she knows he is only pretending to be weak, but Orhan tells her that he really can't push himself any further. Not because his body is incapable, but because he would have to carry the burden of the expectations of all the adults if they found out how strong he is. However, in hiding his ability, he has inadvertently shifted that burden onto Oliver, and he feels guilty for that, so he has decided to devote himself to helping him with everything he has. However, All of a sudden, Cyan yells at Orhan and tells him he shouldn't have to take on such a burden by himself. She explains that she has powers similar to Orhan's, so no matter what it takes, she will make sure she's strong enough to stand by Orhan's side so they can achieve their goal. You may be wondering what the goal in question is, but Orhan's memory of Cyan is fragmented, almost like part of it is missing altogether. Elsewhere in the kingdom, the Grand Master of the Guild receives a visit from the Guild Master of the Southern region. The Grand Master is both surprised and annoyed by the sudden visit, but he knows it must be something important, so he asks the Guild Master to tell him what happened. And he is informed that someone just defeated a black dragon single-handedly in the Southern dungeon. The Grand Master is shocked to hear this since he didn't expect to hear of such a capable fighter from the South, but still, he thinks it was a dumb and risky move to challenge a black dragon alone. The Guildmaster clarifies that the person in question didn't intend to fight the black dragon. It happened due to an emergency situation where the black dragon was teleported out of its regular habitat. The Grand Master finds the whole thing intriguing, so he asks if Oliver was the one who defeated the dragon, but the Guildmaster denies this. Hearing that Oliver wasn't responsible for this has the Guildmaster a little shaken, since the only other person he can think of who could possess such strength is Orhan, but that should be impossible. He asks the Guildmaster if Orhan has exhibited any strange behavior changes recently, but Guildmaster says nothing about Orhan has really changed, which means he hasn't reverted to his old self yet. But this leaves even more questions for the Grand Master, since if Orhan hasn't returned to his original state yet, then that means he must have found some other way to attain great power. In any case, the Grand Master orders the Guildmaster to keep an eye on Orhan and report if anything happens. Meanwhile, out in the eastern region, a party has just slain a large group of adventurers in the forest, and it turns out that Cyan is a member of the attackers. Since there aren't going to be any more strong adventurers in this area for a while, her party decides to move on. But just then, Cyan senses someone nearby, so she tells them to show themselves immediately. It turns out to be a messenger from HQ, and he is here to inform Cyan and the others that someone powerful enough to slay a dragon has appeared in the south. So their mission is to go there, investigate this person, and if he turns out to be an obstacle, to dispose of him. Judging by the lack of information on this person, Cyan deduces that it couldn't possibly be Oliver, but aside from that, she's completely in the dark on who it might be. Ideally, the best result would be to recruit this person to their side, but if he turns out to have sided with the church already, they will have no choice but to kill him. Cyan thanks the messenger for doing a good job and dismisses him for now. She then turns to her teammates and tells them that they will be heading to the Southern Great Dungeon as soon as they are ready. Though, since the South is the church's territory, they will need to be careful to avoid detection. They also need to be cautious about how they approach the Dragon Slayer, since they don't know the extent of his strength. But that's exactly why Cyan wants to go see it for herself. If there really is someone capable of such a feat in the South, then that means they must have the same kind of power as her, and if that's the case, then she's the only one who can stop them. After all, she needs to carry out Orhan's will no matter what. She seems to believe that Orhan died when they were kids because she was given a letter that said so. Now, she believes the church was responsible for Orhan's death, and she has a sword to make them pay, no matter what it takes. Meanwhile, back in the South, Orhan is currently receiving commendations for his exemplary performance protecting the students during the dragon incident. They know he is strong, they acknowledge that he has a lot of valuable knowledge, and most of all, while he was in the hero party, he was skilled enough to handle all their management and operations by himself, so he's an efficient multitasker. For these reasons, the clan leader formally proposes that Orhan be immediately promoted to a lieutenant. A decision like this requires the approval of 2/3 of the existing lieutenants, so he asks everyone to vote on the matter. However, just then, one of the lieutenants speaks up and tells the clan leader that he wants to have a word with Orhan before they vote on this. He acknowledges that Orhan is strong and capable, and he is certainly a welcome addition to the Silver Rabbit clan, but he asks Orhan if he is willing to risk his life for the clan. As a lieutenant, the decisions he makes will have profound effects on the lives of those around him, and all clan members are expected to put the clan first in all circumstances. Orhan understands why they would ask a question like that, but he made a promise a long time ago, and he intends to keep it, so he can't let himself die before that. He addresses everyone in the room and tells them that he is not prepared to sacrifice his life for the Silver Rabbits. The other lieutenants are all shocked to hear this because if Orhan isn't ready to give everything he has for the Silver Rabbits, then he isn't worthy of being a member. They ask him why he even chose to show up here in the first place. And to this, Orhan responds that he simply wants to protect the people he cares about. He says that just because he's not willing to sacrifice his life for the clan doesn't mean he isn't going to do everything in his power to keep them safe. Long story short, Orhan couldn't care less about what happens to the clan, but he does care about the people in the clan, and that's good enough for the other lieutenants. So they all agree to let him join as the newest lieutenant. After the meeting is over, Orhan and Selma are walking through the halls, and she is relieved that everything worked out in the end, but Orhan had her worried for a second there. The next step is to introduce Orhan to the members of Unit 1 whom he will be working with from now on, but before that could happen, a woman named Estella calls out to Orhan and says she needs to have a word with him. Selma introduces Estella as the head of the Silver Rabbit's Personnel Management Division, and she pretty much tells Orhan she needs his help teaching some new arrivals. Orhan doesn't mind teaching a few adventurers, but he's a little worried because he's not sure he will have enough time to teach the new arrivals and manage Unit 1 at the same time. Selma understands why Orhan is concerned, but she tells him he doesn't need to worry about that because he's going to have a lot more free time here than he did in the Heroes Party. For one, he isn't going to be required to do all the administrative work, and they also don't go dungeon diving back to back for days on end. As a matter of fact, they have a policy against spending more than 3 days in the dungeon at one time without taking a break, and Orhan is a little surprised since he didn't expect things to be so laid back here. In that case, Orhan agrees to teach the newbies for Estella, so she leaves to give Orhan a chance to finally meet his new unit. As Orhan walks into the room, he is introduced to the members of Unit 1. They are all eager to finally see the Dragon Slayer again since they didn't get a chance to talk to him during the mission, but frankly, Orhan had no idea they were there in the first place. Anyway, they move on to introductions, and the first to introduce herself is Rain. Despite how she looks, she is actually 24 years old, so she tells Orhan he is free to think of her as a big sister. But no matter how Orhan looks at it, there's nothing big about Rain, and she's really self-conscious about it. Next up is Lucretia, who is 18 years old, and the last guy is Wilk, the 20-year-old defender of the team. Selma is also part of the team, but Orhan is already familiar with her, so there's no need for introductions. Now that introductions are out of the way, Wilkie asks Orhan if he can explain how exactly he managed to defeat the Black Dragon, because they've all been wondering how he did it. Selma tells Orhan that he doesn't need to answer if he doesn't want to, but he thinks it's important that he shares info about his abilities with his new team. He explains that the main reason he was able to win his battle against the dragon was thanks to 2 of his original spells. One is called Impact, a spell that increases the effectiveness of weapons by 100 times. This revelation comes as a huge shock to everyone here since 100 times multiplier is unheard of. Orhan then goes on to explain that his second original spell allows him to increase the effectiveness of all buffs applied by 32 times, which comes as just as much of a shock to the others, but Orhan clarifies that he can only use it on himself, and it puts a lot of stress on his body, so he can only use it for a short period. After learning of what Orhan is capable of, the others wonder why he doesn't just fill other party positions by himself, like a mage for instance, but that's one of Orhan's biggest flaws. He explains that he is only capable of using mid-level magic, and no matter how hard he tries, he has never been able to use any high-level spells. The others are surprised to hear this given how talented Orhan is with everything else, and for a moment, Orhan worries that they might label him as useless. So he defends himself by saying his original spells can make up for his lack of high-level magic, but they really don't care about that. They then ask Orhan if he has any special abilities, and he confirms this, which gets Rain excited because now there are 3 people with special abilities on their team. Orhan asks who else has an ability, but Selma tells him it would be easier to show him in the dungeon rather than trying to explain it. And for that reason, she's planning to have them all go into the dungeon tomorrow. Orhan isn't opposed to the plan, but he informs everyone that his sword was destroyed during the battle against the dragon, so he needs to get a new one. The others think this is terrible news since making a new sword will take at least a few days, but Orhan tells them it won't actually take long, since he just buys swords off the shelf at a local weapons shop. The group is left speechless because they had no idea the Dragon Slayer was using rusty hand-me-down swords, but they won't stand for it any longer. So they drag Orhan to the dedicated blacksmith for the Silver Rabbit clan, Aaron, and they ask him to make a sword for Orhan. Aaron is up for the task, but he says there's a bit of a problem. A sword for someone as powerful as Orhan would need to be made from special materials down on the lower floors, but he doesn't have those materials on hand, so he's going to need them to go get some. Normally, this would turn into a whole 3-episode resource-gathering arc, but fortunately, Orhan happens to have a stash of special materials stored in his bracelet from back when he was part of the hero party, and he's never had much of a use for all this stuff, so he might as well make a sword out of it. In the meantime, Selma informs everyone that the Adventurer Management team recently requested that they gather some noxious sheep pelts, so she thinks this will be a good opportunity to practice their teamwork on floor 86, and Orhan plans to do his best to help Selma and the others break the hero party's record of floor 94. Before long, they all arrive on floor 86, and the scenery on this floor is particularly nice even though it's inside the dungeon. However, Selma reminds everyone that they can't let their guards down because they may only be here to find some noxious sheep, but this floor is crawling with earth dragons, so they could run into danger at any moment. Furthermore, the main reason for this mission is to see how well they all work with Orhan. The plan is simple. Will handle the front lines with Orhan while Rain will attack from the rear with magic, and Lucretia focuses on using her healing magic. As for Selma, as the supporter, she will make sure to keep everyone buffed and give orders when necessary. That said, the others are pretty sure Orhan would be able to handle all the monsters on his own, so a strict formation may not be necessary. Selma tells Orhan that she's fine with it if he wants to fight alone, but Orhan says it's important that he learns to fight as part of the party, so he wants to stick to Selma's formation. Just then, a fireball is suddenly launched at the group, so Orhan leaps forward and casts a barrier to protect them. He realizes that the fireball must have come from a nearby earth dragon, but he can't spot it, so they are going to have to start searching. This is where Lucre's special ability, magic tracking, comes in handy, because it allows her to follow traces of magic left behind by an enemy to track them down. Within a few minutes, she is able to locate the dragon hiding in some bushes, so she casts a flare spell to give away its location, and once the dragon realizes it has been found, it jumps out to face the party. This is the kind of thing that Will usually handles, so he rushes ahead to show Orhan what he can do. After all, while they are all well aware of what Orhan can do, Orhan has no idea what they are capable of. While Will holds the dragon's attention, Rain prepares an attack spell in the rear, and once she's ready, she proceeds to blow the dragon to smithereens. Orhan is impressed that they were able to handle that so quickly. Will is incredibly skilled at blocking and canceling out enemy attacks. Rain just used a special rank spell in half the time that most other casters would, and Lucre's magic tracking abilities make it really easy to fight enemies that are good at hiding. They are all individually strong, but the cherry on top is Selma's leadership ability bringing them together. Just then, 2 more earth dragons show up, and the team sees this as a good opportunity to incorporate Orhan into their formation. So he and Will run out to engage, but along the way, Orhan notices something off, so he stops and fires a stone bullet at a random patch of grass. It turns out that there was a camouflaged turtle hiding in the grass, and it's a good thing that Orhan managed to spot it before it could sneak up on them. But now, they've got a big problem. They are surrounded. The turtle is slower, so Selma asks Rain and Lucre to take care of it while Will and Orhan will be in charge of defeating the dragons. And Orhan is really starting to get excited because he can tell that Selma is the kind of person he can trust to have his back in battle. All of a sudden, Orhan hears Selma's voice in his head, and he is shocked at first. But Selma explains that this is just her special ability, telepathy. It allows her to communicate with her allies over long distances, so it comes in handy when she needs to give orders. Orhan is amazed since he has never seen anything like this before, and Selma is really happy to receive praise from him, but they've still got work to do. So she snaps out of it and asks Orhan to target the dragon's weak spot, while Will is distracting it. Orhan does as she says and begins casting his usual buffs on himself, and when the opportunity arises, he unleashes an impact slash, cleaving the heads clean off the dragons. At the same time, Rain and Lucre also finish dealing with the turtle, so the team is able to continue advancing. As they walk, Selma asks Orhan what he thinks of his first time working with them, and he says it was wonderful, because it has been so long since he won a fight so easily. It's pretty normal for a party to work well together, but Orhan had struggled in the hero's party for so long that he forgot what it was like to have good teammates. Selma turns to Orhan and asks whether he thinks they are ready for the 92nd floor as they are now, and Orhan tells her that he honestly thinks they are more than capable of handling it. Selma asks if that's because he's a part of the team now, but Orhan tells her that even if he weren't here, he still thinks they would stand a good chance of defeating the dragon on their own. Hearing Orhan praise their strength makes them all happy, but Selma still wants to err on the side of caution, because watching Orhan's fight against the dragon that day reminded her of how dangerous that thing is, and she doesn't want to risk losing anyone due to overconfidence, so she asks Orhan to support them as much as he can. Orhan tells her there's no need to be so formal with him because he already made up his mind to support Unit 1 with everything he's got, and since clearing floor 92 is one of their long-time goals, he promises to make sure nothing goes wrong. Anyway, since they are done here, all that's left is to gather the noxious sheep pelts they came for, and they'll be able to return to the surface in time to grab some dinner. A little while later, Orhan and the others are done collecting the sheep's pelts, and they all thank Orhan for doing such a good job skinning the sheep, since they never would have been able to do it so quickly on their own. Orhan tells them it's no big deal, but now that they are done, it's time for Orhan's welcome party. They all want to thank Orhan for choosing to join them even though he could have been accepted anywhere else after slaying that dragon. They promise to do their best to make sure he doesn't regret choosing them, but Orhan says he could never regret being a part of their team. Just then, Lucre bursts into tears because she's so happy that Orhan turned out to be a nice guy. In truth, she was worried that since Orhan is so strong, he might look down on her for being weak, and she wasn't the only one. Both Will and Rain also felt the same, but they are sure Selma had it the worst of all, because she took a huge interest in Orhan early on. In fact, she was so fixated on Orhan that the others are starting to suspect that Selma might have a crush on Orhan or something. Selma immediately denies it and says that as the leader, she was just really concerned about making sure that Orhan felt as comfortable as possible here, but she's clearly really embarrassed. She ends up drinking a lot out of embarrassment, but as a result, a few minutes later, Selma is totally drunk, and she's starting to say stuff that she would normally never admit. She says Orhan is really handsome and starts getting really close to him while hinting at plans that are definitely not PG. Orhan really doesn't feel comfortable with this, so he tries turning to Rain for help, but Rain is just as drunk as Selma is, so she just asks to join in on the fun tonight. Will and Lucre also find the whole thing hilarious, so they say they are fine with just watching him go at it all night with the other, but that's the last thing Orhan would want to happen. Things are starting to get a little too heated for Orhan, and he's on the verge of folding, but at the last second, he remembers that he knows a sleep spell, so he casts it on both of them to knock them out. He's relieved that the crisis is finally over, but despite it all, this is still the most fun he has had in a while, so he's happy. Later that night, back at Selma and Sophia's room, Sophia is starting to get a little worried because Selma hasn't returned home yet. And even though she mentioned that she would be going into the dungeon with Orhan today, there's no way she's still in the dungeon by this time, so she wonders what Selma could be doing. Just then, there's a knock at the door, and Sophia assumes it must be Selma, so she goes to answer it. But just as she's about to open the door, she hears Orhan's voice, and that sends her into panic mode. She starts wondering if Orhan intentionally came to see her when she's home alone, but as she opens the door, she is disappointed to see Orhan carrying Selma on his back. Her brain goes through several emotions as she tries to figure out when the hell Selma and Orhan got close enough for him to be spending the night with her. But Orhan can tell what Sophia is thinking, so he assures her that nothing happened between him and Selma. She just got a little too drunk at dinner tonight, so he wanted to make sure she got home safe. Sophia is relieved to hear that since she was worried that Selma might have stolen Orhan from her, but she isn't happy with how touchy Selma is being with him. So she wakes Selma up and sternly tells her to get off Orhan's back already, and one look at Sophia's angry face was more than enough to snap Selma out of her drunken stupor. After that, Orhan leaves and Sophia drags Selma onto the bed and tells her to start explaining everything that happened between her and Orhan in excruciating detail. Sophia is relieved when she finds out that nothing really happened between them, and the only reason Orhan carried her back here was because she drank too much at his welcome party. But still, she tells Selma that she shouldn't be bothering Orhan like that. Selma apologizes for what happened, but Sophia tells her she doesn't really have anything to apologize for since it was all a misunderstanding, and she didn't do it on purpose. While taking a bath, Selma does some thinking, and she realizes that she has been a lot more relaxed since Orhan joined the team, and that may be a good thing, but she can't let herself get carried away again like she did tonight. After all, she knows Sophia is infatuated with Orhan, and she wouldn't want to upset her by getting in the way of that. However, the fact that Selma is worrying about stealing Orhan away from Sophia is basically proof that she really does view him in a romantic light, and she's having a hard time accepting her feelings. That night, Orhan spent some time looking through the files of the students, and he is surprised by how tragic their backstories are, especially Caroline. The next day, Selma takes Orhan to the management division so he can officially begin his additional duties as a trainer, and there, Orhan meets Estella and Carla. Carla is the one in charge of handling the new members of the clan, so she's pretty much their caretaker. She is glad to hear that Orhan plans to train those three, but there are a few things she wants to make sure Orhan is briefed on, so she asks him if he has taken a look at their files yet. Orhan informs her that he has already seen the group's files, so he knows about all their backgrounds, and he still plans to train them regardless. Carla is happy to hear that because that means she won't have to explain everything to him, and that makes it a lot easier. Orhan asks if there are any specific policies he needs to follow when training the three, but Estella tells him they don't do that here. Orhan is free to do whatever he wants, so he can just teach them things based on his experience as an adventurer. Selma can tell that Orhan doesn't really know where to start, so she asks Estella to at least give him a goal to work towards. So she tells Orhan that it would be nice if he could get the kids to the point where they can handle the middle floors on their own. That's a steep ask, but the kids are pretty promising, so Orhan thinks it's possible, and he agrees to work towards that. On the way out, Selma stops Orhan in the halls since if he read the files, then he must know about the complicated relationship between her and Sofia. Orhan confirms that he knows about it, and he admits that he was a little surprised when he found out. Sofia was born to a maid in the Claudel family, and after her mother died, she was officially adopted by the family, but as an illegitimate child, no one ever accepted her, so she was treated awfully. Of course, Selma did her best to protect Sofia, but after she had to leave to become an adventurer, Sofia's situation became much worse. It got so bad that the next time Selma returned home, she extended a hand to Sofia and asked her if she would like to leave with her. That's why Selma wants to make sure that Sofia becomes an amazing adventurer, so she asks Orhan to take care of her as much as he can. Later on, Orhan meets with the kids, and they are all eager to see him because they heard he was going to be their new teacher starting today. They are so glad to have Orhan as their instructor again because he knows all sorts of things, and he's strong enough to defeat a dragon no diff. But Orhan doesn't think their description is really accurate since his battle against the dragon was a really close call. He also reminds them that one day, they are going to need to face the black dragon as well, especially if they plan to clear the dungeon as adventurers. He knows it may seem like an impossible feat for them right now, but he's sure that with enough time and training, they should be able to pull it off. On that note, he says he would like to set some ground rules for their training, and the first rule is that they have to be thinking at all times in the field. He doesn't want them getting stuck in the routine of following basic protocol in all situations since an adventurer needs to think flexibly depending on the situation. Second, he tells them that they shouldn't automatically assume that anything he says is right. He is a normal person just like them, and though he may have more experience than they do, he has made a ton of mistakes, and he's bound to make a lot more. So if they think he said something wrong, he wants them to speak up about it. Now that that's out of the way, he asks each of them to tell him why they chose to become adventurers in the first place, and he calls on Sofia first, so she explains that she's doing this because she wants to become just like Selma. She wants to be able to do whatever she wants, whenever she wants. Though she's still not all too sure on what she wants to do, so first she wants to focus on becoming a great adventurer. Next is Logan, and he says he simply wants to make lots of money as an adventurer. That's a fairly common answer, but Orhan asks if he could explain a little more. So Logan goes on to inform them that the village where he grew up was extremely poor. The land was infertile, so there was barely ever enough food to go around, but the villagers saw the talent Logan had and decided it would be unfair for him to be stuck here forever, so they all gathered up as much money as they could and sent him off to the city so he could follow his dream of becoming an adventurer. And now, he just wants to earn enough money to repay them for their kindness someday. The next person is Caroline, so Orhan asks her the same question, but she tells him that she honestly doesn't have a particular reason for being an adventurer. She just kills monsters to protect people's smiles and keep them happy. After all, happy people won't hit her like before. She says this with such a deadpan expression that Orhan can immediately tell that there's some deep trauma in her past, and he would rather not open that can of worms right now, so he brushes it off and accepts that Caroline just fights monsters to make people happy. Now that Orhan understands why they all chose to become adventurers, he tells them to always keep their goal in mind to maintain their motivation. On that note, Sofia asks Orhan if he has a reason for becoming an adventurer, and naturally, he does. So he explains that his goal is to become strong enough to never lose anything or anyone close to him again. He realized long ago that you can't protect anything if you're weak, so he plans to continue growing stronger until no one can beat him. He tells the kids that he doesn't intend to treat them like children, so he wants them to give it their best shot during training, and they all agree to do so. Now that that's done, Orhan turns to Caroline and asks if she would mind if he called her by a nickname from now on. She says she doesn't particularly care, but she asks why he would want to give her a nickname all of a sudden, and Orhan explains that the name, Caroline, is a little too long to say in the event of an emergency, so he wanted to call her by something shorter. Carol understands, so she asks Orhan to pick a nickname for her, and he decides to call her Carol, which she seems to be happy with. However, Logan and Sofia are jealous that Caroline got a nickname from Orhan, and they didn't, so they ask him to do the same for them, and Orhan ends up calling Logan Log and Sofia Sophie. With that done, it's time for them to head out on their first training session, so they all head to the dungeon, and once they arrive, Carol is tasked with facing a few wolves. She charges at them with her daggers with ferocious killing intent, but looking at her, Orhan can't help but feel a little worried because the way she's fighting is crazy. Normally, an active defender like Carol shouldn't be trying to defeat monsters. She should be focusing on keeping them distracted so the attacker can finish them off, but even by attacker standards, she's being incredibly reckless right now. After taking down one of the wolves, the second wolf tries to sneak up on Carol from behind, so Orhan decides that this is enough for today and steps in to block the wolf's path and kill it before it could hurt Carol. Once it has been taken care of, Orhan addresses Carol and reminds her that she needs to pay attention to her surroundings at all times in battle so she doesn't get caught off guard like that. However, Carol tells him she was completely aware of the wolf sneaking up on her, and she had intentionally made herself look defenseless to lure it in. Orhan doesn't understand why she would do something like that because she easily could have gotten herself hurt doing something like that, but Carol tells him that's not a problem for her. And to prove it, she takes out her dagger and slashes her wrist right in front of Orhan, all with a smile on her face. Orhan freaks out and tries to stop the bleeding, but to his surprise, the wound suddenly heals on its own. She explains that this is her special ability, so it's practically impossible for her to die, and while injuries do still hurt, she has gotten used to the pain, so there's no need to worry about her. Carol's past is considerably dark. She was captured by the Cyclamen Church and held for years because she had a special regeneration ability, and their goal was to use her power to resurrect the most terrifying of all monsters, the evil god. To that end, they conducted hundreds of gruesome experiments on her, and by the time Carol was found and rescued, even though her body was still in one piece thanks to her ability, her mind had been completely broken. With the help of some rehab, she was able to recover enough to function normally again, but there's still a lot of unprocessed trauma underneath the surface that she refuses to address. Normally, Orhan would just let Carol continue living with her delusion to avoid hurting her, but he promised that he wouldn't treat the kids like children. So he gets Carol's attention and tells her to take a look at Logan and Sophia's faces. They both look extremely worried, and Carol freaks out because she doesn't understand why they aren't smiling. Just as Orhan thought, Carol has a deep obsession with making sure her friends can continue smiling, and she thought they would be happy if she protected them. But Orhan explains that they aren't smiling because they don't like seeing Carol getting hurt. Carol says that shouldn't be a problem since her wounds are all healed, but while it's true that she won't suffer any lasting injuries from her reckless behavior, she still feels pain, and knowing that hurts her teammates just as much as it hurts her. Carol is fine with hurting herself, but she can't bear the thought of hurting her friends, so she begs Orhan to tell her what to do, and he informs her that she just needs to stop intentionally causing harm to herself. Carol reflexively drops her daggers and begins apologizing over and over for what she did. Orhan tries to calm her down, but she instinctively pulls away and begs him not to hit her, because back when she was held captive, if she made a mistake, she would always be beaten for it. But Orhan hugs Carol and assures her that no one is going to hit her anymore. Now that Carol knows she can't let herself get hurt all the time just because she can heal, she has a lot of work to do because till now, she had never learned how to dodge attacks. So Orhan puts her to work in a training simulation he created. While Carol is busy with that, Orhan has Logan training with a spear so he can perform more than one function as an enchanter. And as for Sophia, he's having her count backwards from 1,000 in groups of 7 while maintaining 2 magic circles at the same time and being required to cast different types of magic on command to help her get the hang of parallel. She is starting to get overwhelmed by all the information she has to keep track of, but Orhan tells her she can't afford to get distracted or panic on the battlefield because her teammates would be relying on her. However, she ends up panicking anyway, and just points her staff at one of the targets, but even though nothing should have happened, Sophia feels a wave of power leave her body which ends up knocking the target over, and she didn't even need to cast a spell to do it. After she informs Orhan of what happened, he seems to believe that this may mean that Sophia is manifesting a special ability. Sophia doesn't think she's good enough to have one of those, but since she's related to Selma, Orhan thinks it's possible. Several days of training go by, and now, Carol is able to dodge attacks from all directions fairly easily. Logan has become quite proficient with his spear, and Sophia has gotten really good at her parallel processing exercise. Collectively, they've gotten strong enough to clear the 20th floor on their own, but they've still got a long way to go if they want to become great adventurers. Just then, Orhan is called out of his training session, because the blacksmith is finally done with his custom sword, and with one swing, he can tell that this thing is absolutely perfect for him. So he thanks the blacksmith and swears to use this blade to protect everything he cares about. This was the end of episode 10. Subscribe to not miss the next part.